The sea was calm that night. It was June 5th, 1944, the eve of the greatest invasion the world had ever seen. On the deck of the troopship SS Empire Javelin, Private Harold Baumgarten stood alone, staring into the dark horizon of the English Channel. The air smelled of salt, oil, and fear. He was only 19, a boy from New York who had never seen combat, now part of the 116th Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, preparing to land on the most heavily fortified beach in Europe, Omaha. The lights of hundreds of ships glowed faintly across the water. Destroyers, transports, and landing craft stretched to the edge of the sea, silent silhouettes waiting for dawn. Above, the clouds moved slowly, hiding the moon like a shroud. Men whispered prayers. Some wrote letters home they would never send. Others just stared at the waves, lost in their own thoughts, wondering if they would see the sunrise again. Harold held his helmet close and looked down at the rosary in his hand. He wasn't particularly religious, but that night, faith was the only thing keeping most of them steady. He thought about his parents, his younger sister, the neighborhood back in the Bronx. He thought about the smell of fresh bread from the bakery down the street, about baseball games in the summer, and about how far away it all felt now, a different lifetime. The order had come hours earlier. Operation Neptune, the naval assault phase of Operation Overlord, was officially underway. In just a few hours they would storm the beaches of Normandy and begin the liberation of Europe. But inside every soldier's heart there was no talk of strategy or history. There was only fear and duty. A lieutenant walked by, clipboard in hand, pretending to look calm. "Get your gear ready, boys. We hit the beach at 06:30, H hour." No one answered. There was nothing to say. Baumgarten adjusted the straps on his pack. It was heavy, nearly 70 pounds. Rifle, ammunition, grenades, food, water, and the burden of survival. Around him, the other men tried to sleep on the steel floor, their rifles tucked beneath their arms. But sleep was impossible. The hum of engines filled the night like a heartbeat. Some men smoked, others sang softly to themselves. Hymns, old country songs, anything to keep their minds from what was coming. At around midnight, the chaplain gathered the company. His voice trembled, but his words cut through the cold air. "Men, tomorrow morning we set foot on the soil of France. Some of you will not come back. But remember, what you do out there matters. The world will remember this day." The soldiers bowed their heads. The chaplain's prayer was short. They all knew time was running out. When it ended, Harold looked up at the night sky and whispered, "God, let me do my duty. Let me make it off that beach." In the distance, the low rumble of thunder rolled across the sea, except it wasn't thunder. It was artillery. British battleships had begun their bombardment hours before dawn, their shells streaking across the black water toward the French coast. Every explosion lit up the horizon, flashes of orange against the darkness, shaking the very air. The invasion had begun. Harold's heartbeat quickened. He checked his rifle again, and again. His hands shook as he loaded each round. He looked at the man beside him, Private Jenkins, a tall kid from Kentucky who had once told him he wanted to be a teacher after the war. Jenkins smiled weakly, then handed Harold a piece of gum. "For luck?" he said. Harold nodded and smiled back, even though his stomach twisted with fear. As the hours crawled by, the ship's crew began lowering the landing craft, small metal boats that would carry them to the shore. The sound of chains, engines, and shouted orders filled the air. The smell of diesel mixed with the sharp bite of sea spray. At 3:30 a.m., the first waves of paratroopers had already jumped behind enemy lines. The rest of them, the infantry, waited. Harold watched as the officers unfolded maps, their flashlights glowing faintly under their helmets. The target was clear, Dog Green Sector, Omaha Beach, directly in front of the German 352nd Infantry Division, one of the most experienced units in Hitler's army. "Why us?" someone muttered. No one answered. By 4:30 a.m, rain began to fall. Soft at first, then heavier. The waves grew rougher. Men began to vomit into their helmets, seasick and terrified. Baumgarten gripped the side of the ship and breathed slowly, trying to steady himself. He thought about his training, how they had practiced hitting the beach, running under fire, finding cover. But deep down, he knew none of that could prepare them for what was waiting. At 5 a.m, the naval bombardment intensified. The sky lit up like dawn itself as battleships unleashed hell on the coast. Every man on deck turned to watch. Some cheered, others crossed themselves. They could see the flashes on land now, the cliffs, the pillboxes, the beach. A sergeant shouted, "All right, listen up. This is it. Keep your heads down, move fast, and stay together. Remember your training and you'll make it off that sand." Harold swallowed hard. His hands trembled as he pulled his chin strap tight. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then came the words that froze every soul on that ship. "Load into the landing craft." The moment had come. Men scrambled over the sides, climbing down rope nets into the small boats below. Each craft rocked violently as it hit the waves. The noise was deafening, engines roaring, water slapping against steel, orders shouted over the chaos. Harold jumped last. He landed hard on the metal deck of the landing craft, the cold seawater splashing into his boots. He crouched low beside the others. The boat was packed tight, 30 men shoulder to shoulder, faces pale under their helmets. The ramp in front of them was closed, their only view a thin slit of grey sea ahead. The coxswain shouted over the roar, "Next stop! France!" The boat lurched forward, bouncing violently over the waves. Water sprayed over the sides, soaking their gear. The smell of exhaust filled the air, choking them. Some men prayed out loud. Others were silent, eyes fixed on nothing. As they sped toward the shore, Harold felt a strange calm wash over him. The fear didn't leave, but it changed. It became focus, a sharp, cold clarity. He realized there was no turning back. In a few minutes, everything would change forever. He reached into his pocket and touched a folded photograph. His family. His mother's handwriting on the back. "Come home safe, Hal." The engines roared louder. The waves slammed harder. The sky began to brighten. Dawn was coming. Then, through the mist, they saw it. The coastline of Normandy. Grey cliffs, concrete bunkers, and miles of open sand. The men went silent. The bombardment was still pounding the beach, explosions tearing the earth apart. But even from miles out, Harold could see, the German guns were still firing back. He tightened his grip on his rifle. The invasion of Europe had begun, and Harold Baumgarten, 19 years old, was about to step into the gates of hell. The longest day, Omaha Beach. The first thing Harold felt when the ramp dropped wasn't the salty air. It was terror. Pure, paralyzing terror. Machine gun fire tore through the front of the landing craft like it was made of paper. Men were ripped apart before they even took a single step into France. The water turned red in seconds. "Go! Gio, go!" someone screamed. Harold jumped into the cold water. It was deeper than he expected. It swallowed him whole. His pack dragged him down, the weight of his rifle, his helmet, his gear. It was like the ocean itself was trying to claim him. He kicked, hard, gasping for air as bullets zipped through the water around him. The surface hissed with death. He could see the faint shapes of other soldiers sinking, some motionless, others thrashing helplessly. When Harold finally broke the surface, he ripped off his pack just to stay afloat. He couldn't hear anything, not the screams, not the gunfire, not the explosions, just the muffled pounding of his own heart. He staggered forward, his boots sinking into the sand. All around him, men were falling. This was Omaha Beach, code name Easy Red, and it was hell. He crawled behind a chunk of steel, part of a destroyed tank, and pressed his body against it, gasping for breath. His hands trembled as he reloaded his rifle. A sergeant next to him, he didn't even know his name, was shouting orders, trying to rally the men. "Get up that beach! Move! Move!" But no one moved. The beach was a killing zone. The Germans had the high ground, their MG-42s cutting through the sand like a scythe through wheat. Then Harold saw something that would haunt him forever. A medic, just a boy, ran into the open to drag a wounded man back to cover. He made it halfway before a burst of gunfire cut him down. Harold's stomach turned. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold his rifle. He wanted to run, to dig a hole and hide forever. But then, through the chaos, he heard someone yelling his name. "Baumgarten, get your ass up here!" It was Lieutenant Spaulding, waving him forward. Harold hesitated, then forced himself to move. He sprinted from cover to cover, every step a gamble. Bullets snapped past his head like angry hornets. When he reached the lieutenant, they ducked behind a sand dune littered with broken gear and blood. "We're going up that bluff," Spaulding shouted. "We can't stay here or we're dead." Harold nodded, though his mouth was dry and his legs felt like lead. They gathered whoever was still alive, maybe 10 men out of 50, and began to crawl toward the cliffs. The sand clung to their faces, their uniforms soaked and heavy. Mortar shells exploded all around, throwing up fountains of fire and earth. The climb was brutal. Every inch felt like a lifetime. At one point, a bullet tore through Harold's helmet and grazed his scalp. His ears rang, blood trickled down his face, but he didn't stop. He couldn't, because stopping meant dying. Halfway up the hill, Harold looked back. The sea was churning with wreckage and bodies. Landing craft burned on the horizon. It didn't look like an invasion. It looked like a massacre. But in that moment, something inside him changed. Fear was replaced by something else, something fierce and stubborn. He whispered under his breath, almost like a prayer, "I'm not dying here." Not today. Those words became his anchor, his fuel. He didn't know it yet, but that determination, that refusal to die, would carry him through one of the bloodiest days in human history. When they finally reached the top, the world went silent for a moment. Smoke and dust hung in the air. The smell of gunpowder and burning metal filled their lungs. They had done the impossible. They had broken through. But there was no victory yet, only survival. Harold later said that the only thing stronger than fear that day was the bond between the men who fought beside him. Men who didn't know if they'd live another minute, but still pushed forward. Men who refused to die. Harold's boots touched the top of the bluff just as the sun began to break through the smoke. The view behind him looked like the end of the world. The beach below was covered with twisted metal, fire, and men who would never go home. But there was no time to mourn. The enemy was still up there, hidden in the hedgerows and trenches, waiting. The air buzzed with gunfire. Every sound made Harold flinch. He could taste dirt and blood. His body was trembling from exhaustion, but his instincts screamed, "Keep moving." They pushed inland through fields shattered by artillery. Harold was part of a small group now, maybe 8 men left. The rest were gone, some to wounds, some to the sea, some to silence. A corporal beside him said, "We made it." "We're in France." Harold gave a hollow laugh. "Yeah, but for how long?" The first bullet hit him an hour later. It tore through his cheek, ripping a path clean through the flesh. The impact spun him around, and he collapsed, dazed and bleeding. His vision went black for a moment. He felt warm liquid pouring from his face, tasted the iron of his own blood. He pressed his hand to the wound, gasping. A medic crawled over under fire and tried to bandage him, yelling, "You're gonna be fine, soldier!" "Stay with me." But before the bandage was even tied, another burst of machine gun fire cracked through the air, and Harold felt a second impact, this time in his shoulder. The force threw him backward into the dirt. Pain shot through his body like lightning. He couldn't lift his rifle anymore, couldn't even move his left arm, but something inside him refused to shut down. He rolled over, grabbed the weapon with his good arm, and kept firing. "Come on!" he shouted hoarsely. "Come on, you bastards!" By the end of that first day, Harold had been shot 5 times, in the cheek, shoulder, back, and both legs. Each wound was a message from death, whispering, "It's over." But every time, he whispered back, "Not yet." He crawled through the mud, dragging himself inch by inch toward cover. The sound of mortars thundered around him. The air was thick with smoke and screams. He passed a fellow soldier, a man named Reynolds, who was crying for help. Harold tried to pull him to safety, but his legs gave out. He collapsed beside him. "I'm hit too," Harold gasped. Reynolds looked at him, his face pale. "Then I guess we die here." Harold shook his head, blood dripping from his chin. "No, not today." Hours passed, maybe minutes. Time lost all meaning. When the shooting finally faded, Harold could still hear the ocean, the same ocean he had crossed to get here. He thought of home, of his mother's voice, of a girl he once danced with in a church hall. He thought of the thousands who would never see another sunrise, and he made himself a promise. "If I live through this day, I will never waste a single one again." Night fell. The wounded lay scattered across the field. The Germans still held ground nearby, and any movement could bring another volley of bullets. Harold lay in the dark, bleeding, shivering from cold and shock. Every breath hurt. He pressed his hand against his chest to make sure he was still alive. He could feel his heart, weak, irregular, but beating. That small rhythm became his reason to keep going. Every heartbeat meant hope. Sometime after midnight, a group of medics found him. They nearly passed him by, thinking he was already gone, until one of them noticed his lips moving. He was whispering something over and over. When they leaned closer, they heard it. "Not dead yet." The medics lifted him onto a stretcher, their boots sinking into the soft ground as they carried him down toward the beach. The sky was filled with the glow of distant fires. Ships still burned offshore. The waves rolled gently now, carrying pieces of the invasion back to sea. Harold faded in and out of consciousness. He didn't know if he'd live another hour, but somehow, deep inside, he felt a strange calm. He had survived Omaha Beach. He had refused to die. When he finally woke up, it was in a hospital tent on the English coast. His face was bandaged, his body full of stitches and pain. A nurse smiled when she saw him open his eyes. "Welcome back," she whispered. "You're a miracle, soldier." He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. The only word he managed was, "Alive." She nodded softly. "Yes, Harold. You're alive." Harold's convalescence was long and grueling. Months in hospital beds, surgeries, and endless therapy left him drained. Every movement reminded him of that day, his bruised body a permanent echo of Omaha Beach. But through the pain, one thought remained unshakable. I am still alive. His days blurred together. The hum of hospital machinery became a lullaby, the whispers of nurses, a rhythm of life he clung to. He learned to walk again, slowly, painfully, every step a battle. The scars on his face, his shoulder, his legs were more than wounds. They were proof that death had passed him by, and he had refused to give in. Yet the psychological toll was heavier. Nights were the hardest. Sleep was invaded by relentless dreams, the crashing waves, the machine gun fire, friends lost forever. Harold would wake screaming, drenched in sweat, reaching for comrades who no longer existed. His body had survived, but his mind carried the battlefield in vivid, unrelenting detail. It was during these dark nights that Harold made a vow, not just to survive, but to live, to take every second granted to him and turn it into meaning. He decided that if he had been spared when so many had died, his life must serve a purpose beyond himself. When he returned home to New York, the city felt both familiar and alien. The streets were bustling, alive with life, while he carried the weight of a war no one could see. Family and friends rejoiced at his return, but Harold struggled to explain the invisible scars. Words could not contain the horror he had witnessed, the fear, the courage, the death he had stared down and refused to let claim him. Driven by a desire to heal not just himself but others, Harold enrolled in medical school. He wanted to understand the human body, the fragility of life, and the power of care. Every lecture, every night in the library, every patient he treated reminded him of that day on Omaha Beach, the fine line between life and death and the strength of the human spirit. Years passed. Dr. Harold Baumgarten became known not just as a physician, but as a man who carried with him a quiet wisdom forged in fire. He treated thousands of patients, but always remembered the soldiers who had lain beside him in the mud, never returning home. He taught his students not only medicine but resilience, courage, and the unspoken bond of humanity that war reveals. And he spoke publicly too, recounting his story to those willing to listen. He described the terror, the chaos, and the pain. But he also described something rarer, the will to live, the stubborn refusal to let death dictate the terms of one's life. He would often end these talks with the same words he whispered to himself on Omaha Beach. Not yet. Not today. Those words became more than a mantra. They became a philosophy. A life lived deliberately, with gratitude, with courage, and with the understanding that every heartbeat is a gift. In the twilight of his life, Harold looked back at the journey he had travelled, from a frightened 19-year-old boy to a survivor, a healer, a teacher, a man who had refused to die. And he realised that the true battle wasn't just on the beach of Normandy or in the fields of France. It was the battle to reclaim life, to transform trauma into purpose, and to carry forward the lessons of courage, honour, and humanity. When asked how he survived so much, Harold would smile softly, his eyes reflecting both sorrow and wisdom. "I didn't survive because I was brave," he said. "I survived because I refused to let fear or death decide for me. And when I did survive, I chose to live. And live he did, fully, relentlessly, compassionately." Until the end of his days, Harold Baumgarten remained a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure, to heal, and to rise above the horrors of war. He was not just a soldier. He was not just a survivor. He was a man who refused to die. Even decades after the war, Harold Baumgarten's memories never fully faded. The faces of friends lost on Omaha Beach, the roar of gunfire, the smell of salt and smoke, they were etched into his mind indelibly, like photographs burned into a page of his soul. But instead of allowing them to consume him, he transformed those memories into lessons he shared with everyone who would listen. In classrooms, hospitals, and lecture halls, Harold spoke not just as a doctor, but as a witness to history. He reminded his students that life is fragile, that courage is often silent, and that the human spirit has an astonishing capacity to endure. He recounted the terror of war not for shock, but to illuminate the choices that define us, how we act in the face of fear, how we support one another, and how even in chaos, a single act of perseverance can echo across decades. He often said that survival is only part of the story. Living fully, he insisted, is the true triumph. The boy who once trembled in a landing craft now spoke with calm authority, that every heartbeat is an opportunity, every challenge a chance to rise, and every person met deserves kindness and respect. Harold also became a mentor to veterans, those who carried their own invisible scars. He understood that returning home does not erase the battlefield. His guidance was simple but profound. Confront the past, honor those who were lost, and commit to living a life that would make their sacrifice meaningful. On the anniversaries of D-Day, he would return to the beaches of Normandy, walking slowly among the memorials and sand dunes, reflecting on the cost of freedom and the value of resilience. He touched the plaques and the stones, feeling the presence of those who had fallen. He whispered prayers not just for the dead, but for the living, that they might carry forward courage, compassion, and hope. Through interviews, memoirs, and speeches, Harold's story reached thousands. His tale of refusing to die became more than a wartime anecdote. It became a universal message of determination. "Refuse to let fear define you," he said. "Refuse to let trauma chain you. And above all, refuse to waste the life you have been given." In his quiet moments, Harold would reflect on the strange twist of fate that had spared him while so many perished. He felt gratitude, not just for survival, but for the chance to heal, to teach, to love, and to witness the human spirit in its best form. When he finally passed away, surrounded by family, friends, and the echoes of a life well lived, the world remembered him not only as a soldier, not only as a survivor, but as a beacon of resilience and hope. His legacy endured, in the lives he touched, in the lessons he imparted, and in the very definition of what it means to refuse to die. Harold Baumgarten's story reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand despite it. That survival is not merely escaping death, but embracing life with purpose. And that one man's refusal to surrender can inspire countless others to rise, to endure, and to live fully.